I warned them 3 times, in writing, with maps attached, signatures verified, and boundaries marked in bright orange paint, but they laughed and poured concrete anyway. That's how this story begins, not with shouting, but with a letter the HOA board ignored, and a decision that would turn their authority into evidence. If you've ever been told you're powerless against an HOA, stay with me, because this ends with criminal charges and a lesson nobody on that board will forget. My land sits just beyond the cul-de-sac, a narrow strip that looks insignificant until you need it. I inherited it from my grandfather, complete with survey records older than the neighborhood itself. When the HOA announced a community improvement project, I checked the plans and felt my stomach drop. Their proposed walking path cut straight through my property. I emailed them politely, attached the deed, the survey, and offered to meet. No response. A week later, I sent a certified letter. Still nothing. Neighbors told me the board president said I was confused and that HOA land superseded private claims. That word, superseded, should have been my warning. I posted boundary markers and photographed them. Then I waited. Construction trucks arrived on a Monday morning. Workers unloaded equipment, staked lines, and began digging. I approached the foreman, calm and respectful, and showed him my documents. He called his supervisor, who shrugged and said the HOA approved it. I told them to stop. They didn't. Concrete trucks rolled in by noon. By sunset, a path existed where my land used to breathe. I called my attorney. He asked one question. Did you warn them? I sent him everything. He smiled in that quiet way lawyers do when facts line up neatly. The next morning, we filed a formal notice of trespass and demanded an immediate halt. The HOA responded with bluster. They accused me of stalling progress and threatening the community. They sent a cease and desist of their own, as if paper could rewrite property lines. That was the moment arrogance crossed into risk. Because when private land is knowingly used after written notice, it stops being a civil misunderstanding and starts becoming something else entirely. I stood on the edge of my land, camera recording, watching them celebrate a ribbon cutting on ground they didn't own. They thought I'd fold. They thought I'd be buried in fines. They were wrong. The law was clear, and consequences were already moving. The attorney moved fast. By midweek, surveyors were back on site, orange vests and tripods planted like flags reclaiming ground. They remeasured, photographed, and notarized every inch. The path cut 12 feet into my parcel, uninterrupted, undeniable. We filed an injunction, request, and a criminal complaint, alleging knowing, trespass, and destruction of property. The clerk raised an eyebrow, then stamped everything without comment. The HOA doubled down. Emails accused me of sabotaging accessibility, of hating neighbors, of acting in bad faith. The board president posted that I was weaponizing paperwork, stayed quiet, and kept recording. A deputy visited the site, reviewed documents, and placed a temporary stop order. Construction halted mid-curve, wet concrete drying like a mistake nobody wanted to admit. Neighbors started asking questions. I showed them the deed, the survey, the certified letters. Faces changed. A few apologized for believing the board. Others admitted they'd been pressured to stay silent. The myth of absolute HOA power cracked. When the county inspector arrived, the crack widened. He cited unpermitted work, improper setbacks, and failure to verify ownership. Fines followed, then deadlines. The board called an emergency meeting and invited me. I attended with counsel. They offered to purchase the strip retroactively, pennies on the dollar, if I would withdraw complaints. My attorney asked whether they knowingly built after notice. Silence answered. He slid copies across the table and asked for names. The tone shifted from managerial to personal. That afternoon, investigators requested interviews. The foreman confirmed he'd been warned and told to proceed anyway. Emails surfaced instructing contractors to ignore me. Intent hardened. What could have been a fix became exposure. Charges expanded to include conspiracy and falsifying records submitted to the county. I received threats and friendly advice to back off. I didn't. I slept fine knowing I hadn't crossed any lines. The law favors those who document, not those who dominate. When the district attorney announced a review, the board canceled social events and locked comments online. Sponsors pulled out. Insurance carriers asked questions nobody could answer quickly. By Friday, the path was fenced, signs posted, and the ribbon removed. It looked smaller without applause. I stood there again, camera steady, not celebrating, just witnessing. Accountability doesn't shout. It arrives with stamps, timelines, and consequences that don't care about titles. That night I organized files, backed up footage, and prepared affidavits, knowing momentum matters. Morning brought subpoenas, calendars, and sworn statements. The board's narrative collapsed under timestamps and signatures. Neighbors shared emails corroborating notice. The case stopped being about a path and became about governance, duty, and restraint. When power ignores proof, Proof eventually arrives with authority, patience, and consequences that cannot be voted away. Law prevailed quietly, decisively, and permanently for everyone involved. Court moved slower than construction, but heavier. The district attorney convened a hearing to determine intent, and intent was everywhere. Emails, meeting minutes, invoices, and timelines stacked neatly, each page telling the same story. The board knew. They proceeded. They celebrated. Now they waited. I sat behind my attorney, listening, learning how facts sound when read aloud under oath. Contractors testified first. The foreman described my warnings, the documents shown, and the instruction to continue. Another supervisor confirmed pressure from the board to finish before objections turned into a problem. The judge asked clarifying questions. Answers stayed consistent. The room grew quiet as certainty replaced spin. Then came the permits. A county official explained how submissions were altered to list common land where my parcel should have been. It wasn't a typo. Metadata showed edits after my certified letters were delivered. The defense objected. The objection failed. Screens lit up. Dates matched. Intent sharpened. The board president took the stand. Confidence cracked under cross-examination. My attorney walked him through each notice, each marker, each photograph. He admitted receipt, then claimed misunderstanding, then deferred to counsel. The sequence mattered. Knowledge plus action equals liability. The judge nodded. Outside, residents gathered, whispering about assessments, insurance, and what removal might cost. I felt the weight of being right without feeling victorious. This wasn't about winning. It was about stopping a pattern before it swallowed someone else's property next. By afternoon, the ruling landed. Probable cause for criminal trespass and falsification, referrals for further charges, and an order to restore my land. The path would be removed, costs assigned, oversight imposed. The gavel didn't bang loudly. It didn't need to. The board recessed pale. Their attorney requested time. Time doesn't erase records. Investigators served notices. Accounts were frozen pending review. Contractors were released from liability. Responsibility traveled upward, where decisions were made. I walked the site with a county officer, marking the restoration plan. Soil tests, regrading, reseeding. It would heal. So would the neighborhood, eventually. Cameras followed, but I kept my eyes forward. Accountability isn't spectacle. It's follow-through. That evening, messages arrived from neighbors thanking me for standing firm. I replied briefly. Document everything, be calm. Don't be bullied. The lesson was spreading, not through anger, but through process. When authority ignores boundaries, boundaries answer back. Slowly, precisely, and without mercy. Restoration schedules followed, deadlines posted publicly, and compliance monitors returned weekly. Each visit reduced noise and rumor. The board's remaining members resigned. Replacements appointed temporarily, and training mandated. Trust rebuilds slowly, but clarity accelerates it. I archived everything, shared templates with neighbors, and moved on. Justice didn't shout. It corrected course, documented lessons, and left guardrails for whoever governs next. Afterward, for future boards and residents alike, across the community. What lingered wasn't anger, but a lesson written plainly. Entitlement collapses under light, and dignity endures when challenged. Marcus parked the Harley, wiped the tank once, and locked the garage, confident the street had learned to tell the difference. It reminded everyone watching that vigilance, documentation, and unity protect communities, while silence feeds abuse, and courage practice together, changes outcomes without fear, favoritism, or noise. Even when challenged publicly by those in power. Restoration began at sunrise the following week. Not with speeches, but with machinery undoing a mistake. Crews jackhammered the concrete carefully, lifting slabs like evidence being removed piece by piece. Inspectors supervised every step. Soil was tested, contaminated sections replaced, and the land regraded to match the original survey. Watching it happen felt strange, like time running backward. But accountability often looks like repair rather than punishment. The criminal case advanced quietly in parallel. The district attorney announced formal charges against 2 former board officers: criminal trespass, falsifying public records, and conspiracy to misuse association funds. The wording was clinical, but the meaning was heavy. These weren't fines. These were records. Insurance carriers denied coverage based on intentional acts, leaving personal attorneys scrambling. A receiver was appointed to manage HOA operations temporarily. Budgets were frozen, contracts reviewed, and special assessments paused. Residents attended meetings in record numbers, asking questions that had never been welcome before. Transparency replaced intimidation by necessity, not preference. When people see consequences, participation follows. I was asked to testify again, this time for the grand jury. I brought the same folders, the same calm, Facts don't change when repeated. They accumulate. The jury returned indictments. News spread, but without spectacle. The story no longer needed drama. It had gravity. On my land, grass took root. New sod rolled out in clean lines. Watered daily. Protected by temporary fencing. The receiver ordered signage explaining the correction. Acknowledging the error publicly. It mattered. Not for pride, but for precedent. Mistakes hidden repeat. Mistakes named end. Neighbors stopped by with coffee, with apologies, with questions about surveys and deeds. I shared what I'd learned. Know your boundaries. Document early. Use certified mail. Don't escalate emotionally. Escalate procedurally. The advice stuck because it worked. The former board president's house went up for sale. Others followed. Elections were scheduled under supervision. Candidates ran on boring promises, compliance, audits, listening. Boring sounded beautiful. At a hearing on restitution, the judge ordered full restoration costs, legal fees, and a compliance plan for future projects, including mandatory third-party verification of land ownership. The sentence didn't raise voices. It set standards. Criminal accountability sat alongside corrective governance, each reinforcing the other. I stood at the edge of the grass one evening, sunlight low, thinking about how close this had come to becoming another story of power steamrolling a single owner. It didn't, because preparation met persistence. The land breathed again. The neighborhood adjusted, and authority learned that boundaries, once crossed knowingly, push back with quiet force and lasting memory. Months later, the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm, one built on caution and clarity instead of assumption. The grass on my restored land grew thick and even, indistinguishable from before the path ever existed. That was the point. Restoration isn't supposed to leave a monument. It's supposed to erase harm and leave lessons behind. The criminal cases concluded without drama. Plea agreements were entered, records amended, and sentencing set quietly. Community service replaced grandstanding. Probation replaced authority. No one cheered. They shouldn't have. Accountability is not entertainment. It's correction. The HOA, now under permanent safeguards, adopted strict protocols. Every project required independent surveys, public notice, and written consent from affected owners. The receiver stepped aside after new elections, leaving behind audits and training materials. Meetings stayed open. Minutes stayed public. Questions stayed welcome. It was boring. It worked. Neighbors told me they felt safer challenging decisions. Not louder, safer. That mattered more. Power didn't disappear. It learned restraint. And restraint, when institutionalized, protects everyone. I stopped recording eventually. Not because vigilance wasn't needed, but because trust had earned a trial period. I kept my files, of course. Preparedness doesn't expire. But life returned to normal contours. Walks, conversations, plans not interrupted by concrete trucks. A letter arrived from the county thanking me for cooperation and confirming closure. I filed it. Another from the HOA acknowledged the error formally and apologized. I filed that too. Paper tells the truth when memory fades. Sometimes new residents ask about the fenced correction sign that once stood here. I tell them briefly. Know your land. Speak early. Document everything. Don't confuse authority with ownership. They nod. They remember. On a quiet evening, I stood where the path would have curved and watched the sun drop behind the houses. The land looked ordinary again. Ordinary is precious. It means rules held. It means someone listened to evidence. It means power learned limits without needing another victim. This story isn't about defeating an HOA. It's about insisting that systems follow the law they rely on. It's about understanding that warnings matter, especially when ignored. And it's about knowing that when you prepare, persist, and stay calm, the truth doesn't need volume. It carries weight on its own. I locked my files and went inside. The grass rustled in the breeze, unremarkable and free. That was enough. And if another board, somewhere else, considers ignoring a warning because they think no one will push back, I hope they remember stories like this. Boundaries are real. Paper matters, and consequences once invited always show up.